Chapter 8. I telephoned Emma as soon as I got back to Pangbourne. She was as disappointed as me by the slim pickings my journey to Clacton had yielded, but glad there'd been at least some, and relieved, I suppose, that there was no question of my calling off the search. I'll go to Cornwall tomorrow. I have a hunch Nicky went to see Treffy, and I want to know what Treffy told him. So do I, but Chris, yes? About Considine, you didn't let anything slip, did you? I was careful not to, though I don't mind admitting there were times listening to his simpering voice as he talked about you and Nicky when I wanted to what? Oh, it doesn't matter. Considine doesn't matter. Let's try not to remember that. He's not who we're after, right? No, he isn't, nor was he. Though one day I sensed he might be. I called Mark straight after Emma had hung up. He didn't seem to mind putting in some extra time to cover for me during the week ahead, which was one reason why I wasn't angrier with him for shooting his mouth off to Pauline Lucas. The other reason was that her unexplained visit seemed a minor mystery I could afford to ignore. Emma Moresco's arrival in my life had pushed it to the margins of my thought. I tried to speak to Pam next in order to beg a room at Treadle House, but got no answer from the private number. The girl on reception seemed to think they could fit me in, though. She was oddly cagey about where Pam and Trevor were, but at the time it didn't seem important. I put the matter out of my head. It didn't stay out, however, nor did the enigmatic Miss Lucas. Just as I was preparing for an early night, Tabitha rang, and it was immediately clear she hadn't done so for an idle niece-uncle chat. What's going on with Mum and Dad, Chris? What do you mean? Mum says Dad's gone away, but she won't say where or when he's due back, and she spent so long assuring me everything was all right. It seemed pretty obvious it wasn't. I'm afraid I know nothing about it. I thought she might have confided in you. What about? That's just the point. I don't know. Well, as it happens, I'm going down there tomorrow. How would it be if I called you when I've had a chance to see how the land lies? That'll be great. I'm sure there's nothing to worry about, though. Yeah, well, I wish I was. I was too taken up with my own concerns to make anything of this. The greatest puzzle to me was Tabitha's bizarre idea that her mother might have confided in me. She obviously had entirely the wrong idea about brothers and sisters, probably because she was an only child. I went so far as to try the private number at Tredore's house again, but there was still no answer. Just as I put down the telephone, it rang again, which surprised me. 2 calls on a Saturday night was 2 more than I usually received, and this particular call wasn't so much a rare species as one verging on extinction. Where have you been all day? Staying out of your life, Miv. Isn't that how you like it? Don't be like that. It seems I might owe you an apology. You have done for years, but I never expected. About the Lucas woman, or whatever she calls herself, the fact is I think I could have helped her, could help her set you up. Inadvertently, I mean. Unintentionally, you know. No, I said, ratcheting at my concentration. I don't know. I mean, I just didn't connect with her, not at first. But when I thought about it, well, it clicked. What clicked? This girl rang me a few days ago. She said she was a freelance journalist called Laura Banks, engaged by one of the music mags to do a piece on me, interviewed me over the phone about old times on the road, the usual stuff. You got a lot of approaches for that kind of material, I imagine. Not many. You sarcastic bastard. Now listen, I suppose I was flattered. Not that I wanted to go back to those days, but it's fun to talk about them, even after my ex-husband once in an ultramarine moon. Are you saying she could have been pumping me about you? She was certainly very curious about you. After you called yesterday, I rang the number she gave me just to check. Unobtainable? The operator said even the dialing code didn't exist. There was a pause, then she said, sorry, Chris. Never mind, I said, steeling myself not to blame her. It wasn't your fault. Who is she? I don't know. But I was going to find out. That now seemed to be one certainty sown among many imponderables. When I set out for Cornwall in the morning, she'd be waiting somewhere ahead. She hadn't finished with me yet. Perhaps she hadn't really begun. There was more than one beast, it seemed, hiding in the forest. Are you any kind of trouble, Chris? I'm not sure. Does this have something to do with Nicky Lanyon? I read about him in the paper. Nothing at all. You're lying. No, I'm hoping, without a lot of confidence. If there was anyone in Truro who doubted Michael Lannon's guilt, other than his own family, they kept quiet about it during the weeks following his arrest. It was easy to say, as my father did, that the police could be trusted to have good reasons for charging him along with Edmund Tully. It's what I assumed myself. I wasn't a rebellious child. I'd been raised to trust authority as well as respect it. If my parents and the police said something was so, then to me it was unquestionable. Why Michael had done what he'd done and what the consequences were for him and Nicky and me taxed me more than the central issue of his guilt or innocence did not a friend to confide in. I wandered around Truro through the dusty days of late summer, imagining all manner of crazy preludes and unlikely preludes to Uncle Joshua's murder. I wanted to see Nicky and heal the breach between us without confronting the cause of it, but I knew that wasn't possible. When we next met, which I suppose we were bound to do when the Truro school year began, on the second Wednesday in September, there was going to be some kind of reckoning. But what kind, I couldn't imagine. My dad says they're going to hang your pal's dad. Don Prado announced with a gleeful leer when I met him fishing one afternoon down by the Morosk Viaduct. He reckons they'll string him by the neck. He added a choking noise and roll of the eyes in his prediction. Want to see how they tie a noose? It's not a joke, I shouted at him in protest. It's a comeuppance, Don reposted. That's what my dad calls it. Pride goes before a fall. That's what he says. Don's father wasn't the only one who relished the reversal in Michael Lannon's fortunes. I was too young to sense it at the time, but now it seems as obvious as it was cruel. Michael Lanyon had been raised from the gutter, on an old man's whim. That's what they have said about him. He didn't deserve the advantages he'd been given, so by the same twisted logic, he deserved to have those advantages taken away. He deserved to be humbled, but the law had something far worse than that in store for him. He and Tully were due to have the case against them heard by the Truro magistrates early in September. Until then, they were languishing on remand in Exeter Prison, 90 miles away, while at Trudor House, Michael Lanyon's mother and wife and son sat out the siege as best they could, seen nowhere and consoled by no one. They too were in prison. There was no bars at their windows, no jailers patrolling beyond them, but for them, as for Michael Lanyon, there is no way out. I had a single dismissal sight of them at this time. It came one morning at the railway station. I've gone down there straight after breakfast to watch whatever was coming or going from my favourite vantage point on the Black Bridge, the footbridge spanning the tracks and goods yard just west of the station. It was an ideal spot from which to see the first up train from Penzance go through, and that's where I was when the 8:40 to Bristol pulled in. As the smoke cleared the bridge and I looked down onto the platform, three figures hurried forward to board the train: Cordelia, Rose and Nicky. They were going to Exeter to visit Michael. I realised at once that was what they were about. The early start would allow them a decent stay before they had to return. Not that I knew the first thing about arrangements for visiting prisoners, nor whether Nicky was going to go in with them or be left outside. Either way, I could glimpse the mixture of dread and anticipation in his expression. Pale, fixed, determined, but unequal to what lay ahead of him. I glimpsed that too. Slowly, he was being overwhelmed. This was just one early moment in the process, but perhaps the first moment when I appreciated what it meant to him, when I started feeling sorry for him than for myself. I cried out to him loudly and instinctively, but too many doors were slamming, too many voices shouting. They were gone in instant, bustling into the carriage. Nicky didn't look up as his mother pushed him aboard. He didn't see me. He didn't hear me. He was gone. I ran back across the bridge, down the steps and along the road towards the station entrance. I knew it was a hopeless effort. The train was standing at the farthest platform and it was already moving when I dodged in through the parcel gate, but still I ran after it in the vague hope that Nicky would see me and know I really was trying to reach him. I stopped at the far end where the platform chambered down to the trackside and stood there panting with my hands on my knees as the train gathered speed and moved steadily away from me, out across the city. I never found it if Nicky saw me. The chance to ask him has a long time coming. When he finally arrived, I didn't take it, and he'll never come again. A letter from the Truro coroner arrived while I was packing a bag early Monday morning. As Constantine had told me, the inquest into Nicky's death was to be held on 26 October, and I, like him, was required as a witness. In a sense, I was pleased to have a deadline to meet. 3 weeks would be enough one way or the other. I gave the stag its head and reached St. Maur's in the middle of a milk-mined afternoon. The Roseland was looking at its autumn best, green and rolling and refueled. The estuary had a clear blue beckoning sparkle with the slack sail of slow-moving yachts scattered lazily across it. I traced George Treffry by the post office, where he drew his pension, to Tangier Terrace, a row of narrow white slate-roofed cottages of Churchill, perched vertiginously above town and sea-like guillemets on a cliff face. There was no answer at his door, but a keen-eared neighbour looked out and told me this was the invariable horror of Mr. Treffry's perambulations. I was advised to try the road to Castle Point and to look out for an old fellow in a brown suit and battered trilby, with a snow-white moustache, accompanied by an elderly bull terrier. It was a good description, but I had missed him nonetheless. If I hadn't happened to glance over the beach wall when I reached the road, his perambulations had evidently taken him no further than a bench in the sunny lee of the wall, where he was enjoying a quiet pipe while his dog pottered aimlessly on the foreshore. I hurried down the nearby flights of steps to join them. George Treffry, I ventured as I neared the bench. He turned a slow frown towards me. I don't suppose you remember me. You're right there. His voice had gruffened with age. He eyed me warily from beneath the brim of his trilby. Perhaps he was worried in case I was an old lag he'd once sent down. If so, he must have concluded I was too young or too respectable, because his tone softened as he added, "Should I? Chris Napier?" "Napier?" the frown returned. "Joshua Cunnerworth was my great-uncle. You interviewed me after his murder. I'd have 11 then." Good Lord! He took the pipe from his mouth and stared at me. "So you would. Can I sit down? It's a public bench." Undeterred, I sat beside him. The bull terrier came panting over, suspicious, but his master reassured him with a pat. A wave broke idly on the beach, and a gull curled past us. A shadow flickered across the sun. "This about the Lanyon boy? We were best friends at school. We were best friends as children, but only as children. I imagine that ended in the summer of '47. I used to think so, but since Nicky's suicide." "Conscience troubling you, Mr. Napier?" "Yes. What about you?" He treated me to a lengthy glare, then smiled faintly, as if he was too old to sustain an outraged front. "Arthritis is troubling me. Old age is boring me to death, but conscience doesn't give me even an occasional jab. Nicky thought his father was innocent. So would I, if I'd been his son, but I wasn't. I was investigating a murder. That's what I told your pal when he came to see me." "When was that?" "About a week before his death. Nicky came here then." "He did. What did he want?" "I think he wanted me to say I regretted putting together the case against his father. Regretted seeing him hang. It was hard to be sure. He wasn't making a lot of sense. I felt sorry for him, but I had to tell him the truth." "Which is?" "That his father was guilty as charged." "You've always been sure of that?" "Oh yes, it was depressingly straightforward case, if you really want to know. Not much real detection involved. We apprehended Edmund Tully less than 12 hours after the murder. There were bloodstains clothes in his bag when we took him off the train, and the samples later turned out to match your uncle's blood type. There were eyewitnesses who picked out Tully in an identity parade as the man they'd seen running away down Lemon Street, plus his fingerprints on the murder weapon. He threw the knife into a drain at the bottom of the hill, but it hadn't rained for weeks, so it was just lying down there waiting for us. All in all, there wasn't a lot of work for us to do." "What about Michael Lanyon?" "Tully led us to him within hours of his arrest. He had nearly 500 quid in his bag, and when he saw the evidence piling against him, he admitted Lanyon had paid him the money to do away with Mr. Cunnerworth. He was to get 500 when the job was done, but he botched it so badly he panicked and made a run for it. He denied it all later, said would coerce him into gaslighting and confession. His barrister cobbled together a story that his treatment as a Japanese prisoner of war had made him vulnerable to the slightest pressure under interrogation. But there wasn't any pressure. There didn't need to be. He admitted that in the end, when he changed his plea. Besides, I knew it was the truth as soon as he said it. How? Just a feeling you get in the line of work. What do you do for a living? I restore cars. So you can tell when an engine's running sweetly. Yes. Same with the stories people tell and the way they tell them. Treffry tapped out his pipe against the edge of the bench and inspected the empty bowl. It's all fitted together, you see. Tully and Lanyon met at Oxford. Got to be good friends. Toured Europe together. Tully had a wealthy father to pick up his bills, just as Lanyon had Mr. Connorworth. Then they drifted apart. Lanyon went back to Truro, Tully to the family firm up north. When the war broke out, he joined the army and had the bad luck to wind up in Malaya. He was captured at the fall of Singapore and spent more than 3 years in a Japanese prison camp. That does something to a man. I reckon it's what made Tully a murderer. What made Michael Lanyon a murderer? Temptation. Mr. Connorworth was thinking of changing his will. You know that. You were with him when he went to seek his solicitor. Michael Lanyon was the sole beneficiary under the will Mr. Connorworth made when he came home from Alaska and found out how things stood with the boy's mother. I suppose he thought his own families didn't need any help at the time. Later, as he grew older and you and your sister turned up to make him think about the next generation, he decided to share his fortune more fairly. God knows there was plenty to go around. If Michael had known just how much, maybe he'd never have. Trevor shrugged, but that's just speculation, isn't it? It seems to me this is all speculation. You can't be sure Uncle Joshua meant to change his will, or that Michael Lanyon knew what his intentions were, or even knew he stood to inherit under the old will. Come to that. But I can, Mr. Napier. Tully told me. Now, how could he have come by that information other than through his old friend? And what reason did he have to murder Mr. Connorworth other than to help his old friend out? He couldn't settle to anything after he came home from the war. There'd be some kind of family feud even before he joined the army. I forget the details now, but the upshot was that he started making a nomadic life, drifted from one boarding house to another, drinking too much and spending too much until he found himself in Truro, largely by chance to hear him tell it, and decided to touch his old chum from Oxford for a loan. You were there when they met for the first time in about 15 years. Cold, quiet, and juicy, I remember. I do remember, yes. Michael looked anything but pleased to see him. That was before he realised what Tully might be able to do for him. Tully hung around Truro because he saw Lanyon had done well for himself and thought he might be pursued to help him get back to his feet, according to Tully. Not just Tully, there was a witness who corroborated his claim to have seen Lanyon at the Daniel Arms slap bang opposite the Lander Monument. Mark Hugh, 2 nights before the murder. That's when the money changed hands. The night after Lanyon withdrew £500 in cash from his bank account. The witness was a reliable man. What was his name now? Vigus? That was it. Sam Vigus worked for Killicrew, the removers. Sam Vigus was clear in my memory as an overall figure of some girth, likely to be seen humping and heaving at the scene of just about every house move in Truro during the 40s and 50s. His wife was even clearer, as one of the slaves to fashion who helped Grant make such a success of credit drapery. Our forgotten Sam had also played a small but vital part in convincing Michael Lanyon of murder. Vigus saw Lanyon give Tully a bulky brown envelope. His description of the envelope matched the one in which the money was found in Tully's bag, and that envelope had Lanyon's fingerprints on it. Vigus also heard Lanyon telling Tully to do what he'd been paid to do soon. He saw them look out the window at the Lander Monument, as if choosing the spot. Tully wrote to Mr. Connorworth next morning, saying he had some embarrassing intimate love letters sent by Cordelia Lanyon to Tully's late father, which he was willing to sell to the highest bidder. Would Mr. Connorworth meet him at the Lander Monument at midnight the following night to fix terms? That was the setup. The letter was never found, though, was it? Mr. Connorworth presumably destroyed it before setting out to keep the appointment. Anyway, that's not the point. What it shows is that Tully knew things about the Lanyons only a member of the family could have divulged to him. Yes, but Michael might easily have mentioned his mother was Uncle Joshua's former sweetheart when he and Tully were undergraduates together. What are you suggesting? I don't know, except that it wasn't quite open and shut case it seemed to be at the time. Treffy shook his head pityingly. No good, Mr. Napier. Lanyon paid Tully £500. We know that for a fact. He said it was for old time's sake, but you're not about to tell me you believe that. Tully murdered Mr. Cunninworth. We know that for another fact, and I'm afraid a third inevitably follows. You're certain Michael Lanyon deserved to hang? I am, and Tully, him too. The Home Secretary thought otherwise. That's politicians for you. There was sympathy for Tully because of his war record and because he even eventually owned up. Well, they had a contrived look about it to me. I think Tucker Lee knew he was going to be convicted and reckoned a confession, however late in the day, might swing a reprieve. The judge seemed to fall for it, and the Home Secretary went along with him. Tully handled the trial a sight better than the murder. I have to hand it to him there. Our British prison must have seemed like a holiday camp after 3.5 years in Changi jail. But Michael Lanyons didn't confess, even when Tully's change of plea left his defences in tatters. There's no point, no mitigation, you see. It was a strange case in that sense. The man who delivered the fatal blow always seemed less guilty than the man who talked him into it. What really hanged Lanyon was the stark ingratitude of commissioning his benefactor's murder and the exploitation of his war-ruined friend. There might be another explanation for his refusal to confess. Strange enough, I think you're right. But it's not the explanation you seem to have in mind. The bull terrier, and put up and nuzzled his master's knee as if he'd had enough and wanted to go home. But Treffys was in no hurry to leave. He seemed to be relishing the debate. Lanyon's family was so sure he was innocent, he couldn't bring himself to disillusion them. Maybe he thought it was kinder to leave them in the memory of a wrong man. From what I saw of his son, though, I reckon he was mistaken. The truth always preferable. In the end, it's easier to live with. Are you sure you know what the truth is? In this case, yes. How can you be absolutely sure? I mean, like I told you, professional instinct. What about me then? How can I be sure? If what I've said hasn't convinced you, then, he shrugged, I can't help you. Maybe you can. It's occurred to me, you see, that one man knows the exact truth beyond question. Tully. Trevor nodded. Your pal Nicky Lanyon seemed to have the same idea as far as I can tell from his ramblings. No disrespect to the boy, but he was pretty confused when he came here. What I did gather, though, was that he was looking for Tully and thought I could put him in the right direction. I had to disappoint him there, I'm afraid. Why, is Tully dead? Could be. He never struck me as the sort to make old bones, but I've no way of knowing or finding out. Surely the probation services keep tabs on prisoners released on license. They do. But there's a strange thing, probably just as well. The press never got wind of it. Tully went missing a few months after he was released. They let me know in case he headed this way, looking to settle old scores. But I never saw hide nor hear of him, and neither did anyone else. I had a word with some old contacts after the Lanyons boys' visit, and I can tell you nothing's changed. Tully hasn't been seen or heard of for 12 years. Abroad seems a good bet. South Africa, Argentina, somewhere like that. He'd fit in there, I'd imagine. You mean he's on the run? Technically, yes. But since he's already been released, it's a manhunt that he'll never get beyond the filing cabinet. Overseas is only my theory. He could be literally anywhere, or nowhere now, of course. And that's what you told Nicky. It is. Seemed to knock out wind there in his seemed to knock out what wind there was in his sails. I'm sorry for that in view of what happened. But his weary shake of his head and seaward squint seemed to speak of all the human frailty his working life had acquainted him with. The bull terrier sat down slowly and settled his muscle into Treffy's spirit. If Tully isn't dead, he might as well be for the difference it makes. What about his family? He might be in touch with them. Doubt it. His parents were dead by the time of the murder, and there was no love lost between him and his brother. He was the only relative I tracked down when I went up to Yorkshire to check on Tully's background. He'd taken charge of the family's firm, a linen mill, as far as I can recall, probably closed down years ago. And I dare say the brother's pushing up the daisies. He was the older of the two by quite a few years. Where was the mill? Hebden Bridge, halfway between Leeds and Manchester. Can't remember much about the place. A dull day in Yorkshire, a mill town doesn't leave many traces in his memory. and Charlie's brother was as tight-lipped as they come. The whole business was an embarrassment to him. He didn't want to know, and I can't say I blame him. So where did Charlie go when he left prison? Not Yorkshire, the probation office. So he was assigned to. The one who contacted me when went missing was based in London. He said he had set up Tully in a small flat somewhere. Described him as a homeowner. Well, a lot of ex-cons are, especially if they're lifers. No mystery in that, and not much in his doing a bunk. Not much in his doing a bunk. He was a wanderer by nature, so he wandered off. It's only what you'd expect. You make it sound so simple, so predictable. Murder often is. I blame those crime writers for making people think it's complicated. There have been such things as miscarriages of justice. Not on my patch. I wish I could share your confidence. Jeffrey treated me to a benevolent smile. I'm afraid settlement is clouding your judgment, Mr. Napier. It does you credit, I suppose, but it won't accomplish anything, nor will closing my eyes to the remote possibility that Michael Lanyon was a wrong man. Remote is right. Remember this: a man is innocent until proven guilty. Once the verdict's in, it works the other way around. Michael Lanyon is guilty until you prove him innocent, and that you never will. Treffry stirred the bull terrier gently, levered himself up the bench, and flexed his knees. Time I was off home. Buster wants his tea. Come on, boy. He lumbered off, the dog plodding after him. But he paused at the foot of the steps to touch his hat to me in an oddly courteous farewell. Then he started up to the road and Tangier Terrace and the resting place of a professionally untroubled conscience. The case against Michael Lanyon and Edmund Tully went before the Truro magistrates on Monday, 1st of September 1947. It occupied most of the week and a serviceable daily chunk of the front page of the Western Morning News, since it was virtually a taboo subject in the Napier household. At any rate, in my presence, the newspaper examiner over Pam's shoulder, after she serendipitously rescued it from the bin, was really the only insight into the proceedings I had. A distant glimpse of the Crown, the Gazette at the rear of the court on back here each morning and afternoon to see the coming and going of the defendants was certainly enough to deter me from seeking a closer view. There was something unsettling about the way they moved and looked, something ugly and vengeful in their eyes, something, I suppose, of the mob that people anywhere can so easily become. The evidence, as said in the newspaper, sounded damning enough, although I couldn't understand why it took so long to present. According to Pam, that was because I had no appreciation of how a court of law worked. I was fooled at the time into believing she did have, but in those pre-television days with no weekly fix of Perry Mason to share, our imaginations of the legal world was as remote to us as ancient Rome. We could read what the country pathologists had to say. We could study the versions of events given by witnesses. We could pick our way through Inspector Treffry's painstaking account of how and why his inquiries had first led him to Edmund Tully, then to Michael Lanyon's. We could analyse every detail, but how these details sounded in court, what impressions they created, and whether they allowed any margins for doubt, were matters beyond our grasp. I often thought of Nicky reading the same newspaper articles in his bedroom at Treador House, secretly perhaps, but torchlight beneath the sheets, while his mother and grandmother talked anxiously downstairs late into the night. It wouldn't be any clearer to him. I knew it wouldn't be any simpler, and the fact that the case went unanswered at this stage would only make his mental wrestling with the evidence more futile. None of the defendants testified. They both reserved their defence, according to the Western Morning News. Crime respondent, the magistrate retired for less than 15 minutes before committing them for trial to the assessors. It seemed like torture for a deferral. The 3 days had been devoted to deciding there should be a trial, something every inhabitant of Truro had known there was going to be for several weeks past. A lot of them thought they knew the outcome as well, and I was beginning to feel I did too. Looks bad for young Michael, done it? I heard Mrs. Boundary say to my mother one morning at the shop, where I was ostensibly helped out Pam's school term, having commenced a week earlier than mine. Fearful what people can do for money, don't you think? It's dreadfully upsetting, Mum said. Accurately enough, though, I could detect in her voice the desire to make several other less guarded remarks. I saw his mama leaving the court yesterday, drab and drawn as a vineyard. She's aged something awful these past weeks. It must be a terrible strain for her, and only likely to get worse. My reg reckons he'll hang for sure. We shouldn't jump to conclusion, Mrs. Boundy. Should we? Should we not, though? Mrs. Boundy's head swiveled like that of a pigeon, eyeing a grain of coin, as she looked meaningfully at Mum across the counter. Well, I can see as how it's awkward for you, Mrs. Napier. Of course, considering where old Connor's money is going to end up when this is over, like my reg says, one man's albatrosses and a man's golden goose. I reached Tredore's house late that afternoon, my mind filled with long ago events that had left George Treffery more than 30 years on, undimmed in his certainty that justice had been done to Michael Lanyon. It was a certainty that I never shared, however often I let others, as well as myself, believe I did, but still I couldn't say why, and the one man who could resolve every doubt and answer every question was missing. Despondency was creeping in, resignation was preparing to open its retreat for me, but a dead end isn't always what it seems. A concealed turning only reveals itself just before you hit the wall. What I'd forgotten was what I'd just begun to understand. This wasn't only about the past. The receptionist said Pam was waiting for me in the flat. The converted stable block she and Trevor had turned into a comfortable home. It sounded curiously like a summons, so I went straight round to see her. She didn't have to say a word for me to know something was badly wrong. She looked tired and unkempt, and hugged me tighter and longer than usual. We've never been the most demonstrative of siblings, and the way she clung to me sounded even more alarm bells than the dark smudges beneath her eyes. I didn't know whether to be glad or sorry when I heard you coming, Chris. I've not been sure whether I could go on keeping this quiet, but right now I'm grateful for shoulder to cry on. What's happened? Where's Trevor? Gone. Gone? What do you mean? I mean, I've thrown him out. Good God, I've no idea. Tabs phoned me last night. She seemed worried about you both, but I thought it was nothing. What the hell's been going on? What's he done? What hasn't he done? Over the years, I've been wondering that, asking myself just how much I haven't known, and for how long. You're going to have to explain. All right, you may as well know the full story detail. On Sunday morning, I had an anonymous letter, well, an envelope. Anyway, there wasn't actually a letter inside, just a photograph showing my husband having sex with a prostitute. You're kidding? No, I wish I were. I opened the post over breakfast with Trevor sitting opposite me, and found myself looking at a photograph of him in some hotel room with that. I can hardly believe it, nor could I, but there was proof in front of me. A one-off, Trevor said, an unprecedented and never to be repeated lapse that weekend when he went to London for the hotel catering fair. The photo was almost as nasty a surprise to him as it was to me. He obviously thought I was never going to know anything about it, which makes it equally obvious it wasn't the first time it happened. But who took the photograph? Who sent it to you? You better ask Trevor. Perhaps he knows who arranged it. I don't care. A well-wisher, I suppose. Isn't what they call somebody who thought I should have my eyes open. Well, they've been open, and how? I still can't quite believe it. I mean, you've been married for 24 years, and you're saying that's over. I'm certainly not sharing a bed or home with Trevor after this. Do Mum and Dad know? Not yet. You're the first, Chris. They'll take it badly. Perhaps you think I should try to patch things up for their sake. I'm not saying that, of course I'm not. Secretly, indeed, part of me was pleased. Trevor, imagine, as the ideal son-in-law, was to be smashed beyond repair. But already something about the circumstances of his destruction was beginning to worry me, and that worry was diminishing what should have been my sole concern, my sister's state of mind. This is a real shock, Pam. Shouldn't you take some time to decide how best to deal with it? There's only one way to deal with it. It must seem like that now, but you don't understand, do you? She glared at me. You have no idea what it's like. The photograph made me feel physically sick, not because of what Trevor was doing in it, but because he was doing it with a stranger, and he was loving it. He was having the time of his life. Pam, let's just see for yourself. She whirled away to the bureau, wrenched open a drawer, and pulled out a large envelope. I don't want anyone saying later that I imagined this, that I overacted, that I got it wrong. She moved back to where I was standing and held out the envelope for me to take. Have a look, Chris. Have a look at what my husband gets up to on weekends away. Then tell me I need to take some time for reflection. I took the envelope from him, reached inside and lifted out the photograph. It was a large glossy black and white print. Small wonder Trevor had been as appalled by it as Pam, for there he undeniably was, naked and grinning, clambering flabby into bed. But one part of him was far from flabby, and the reason was obvious. A sleek-skinned woman wearing some kind of short silk slip was sitting on the bed, the slip riding up around her lips as she smiled invitingly at him. I caught my breath, not because of the spy-hole explicitness of the scene, but because of the woman's face. Like Simon, he wasn't just synthetic lust for Trevor's benefit. It was the thrill of a trick expertly played. I knew that for certain because hers was the face of Pauline Lucas. Thanks for listening.